The sun hung low over the sprawling plains of the Wyoming frontier, its dying light painting the dust in hues of gold and rust. The wind whispered softly through the sagebrush, carrying with it the scent of horses, sweat, and dry earth. Along the edge of that lonely horizon rode a man named Cole Danner, a drifter, a cowboy with no home to call his own and a past buried deep under miles of trail dust. His boots were worn thin, his hat tilted low to shade eyes that had seen more sorrow than most men could stomach. He came upon a small homestead, a modest ranch half swallowed by the prairie, with fences that leaned and a roof that begged for mercy from the wind. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, thin and uncertain, as though it wasn't sure it belonged there anymore. Cole reined in his horse, a chestnut mare named Dusty, and stared for a moment. Something about that house pulled at him. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the single figure standing by the corral, a woman with her sleeves rolled and a rifle leaning against the fence beside her. Her name was Evelyn Hart, though the townfolk called her the Widow Hart. Her husband had died 2 winters past, leaving her with 2 children and a patch of land the bankers were circling like wolves. She had learned to do everything herself, mend fences, milk cows, shoot coyotes that came too close, but hardship had etched lines on her face, and weariness had dulled her once bright eyes. When Cole approached, she lifted her rifle slightly, not out of fear but habit. "If you're looking for work—" "Stranger," she said, voice steady but tired. "I can't pay much." Cole tipped his hat. "A warm meal and a roof will do for me, ma'am." Something in his tone, humble, gentle yet sure, made her hesitate. He didn't look like the rough sort that drifted through town after a bottle and trouble. There was a steadiness about him, the kind of quiet strength she hadn't seen since her husband died. So she nodded and motioned him toward the barn. "You can start by fixing that fence line, before the cattle wander into the creek again." Days passed and Cole worked like a man born to toil. He mended the fences, split wood, and even taught her young boy, Tommy, how to handle a horse without fear. The widow watched him from a distance, unsure what to make of him. He never asked for more than a plate of beans and coffee, and every evening he'd sit on the porch after supper, staring out at the horizon as though he was waiting for something or someone to ride out of it. One evening, as the sky burned orange with sunset, Evelyn brought him a small pouch of coins. "It ain't much," she said, voice low, "but it's what I owe you. You've done more work in a week than I could have hoped for." Cole looked at the pouch, then back at her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I don't pay for kindness." She frowned. "Then what do you call all this work?" "You earned it." He shook his head, the brim of his hat hiding his eyes. "You gave me something I ain't had in a long while, a place to belong, even for a few days. You don't owe me a damn thing." For a moment she stood there, the cool wind lifting strands of her hair. It had been years since a man had spoken to her like that, not with pity, not with need, but with respect. "You're a strange one, Mr. Danner," she murmured. "Maybe," he said with a half-smile, "but strange ain't always bad." As the days turned into weeks, something unspoken began to bloom between them. Not love, not yet, but something gentler, like trust taking root in dry soil. Cole never spoke of where he came from, and Evelyn never asked. But late at night, when the wind howled and the children slept, she'd find herself thinking about that cowboy's quiet strength and the sadness behind his steady eyes. Then one stormy night everything changed. A gang of riders came down from the hills, men from a nearby ranch, led by a ruthless foreman named Cowboy. He claimed Evelyn's late husband owed money, and now he wanted payment in land or cattle. When she refused, they threatened to take what they wanted by force. Cole was in the barn when he heard the shouting. He stepped out into the rain, water dripping from his hat, eyes burning cold. "That's enough," he said, voice cutting through the thunder. Barlow sneered. "Who the hell are you, cowboy? This don't concern you." Cole's hand rested on the butt of his revolver. "Seems to me it concerns me plenty." Lady said no. "That means you ride out." The tension broke like lightning. In the downpour, guns flashed and chaos erupted. Cole moved fast, too fast for men who thought they knew violence. He dropped 2 riders before they could even draw, the others scattering into the dark. Barlow took a bullet to the shoulder and cursed, spitting blood before he fled into the night. When it was over, Evelyn stood trembling, the rain washing blood from the dirt. Cole turned to her, breathing hard, and said quietly, "You best stay inside, ma'am. It's over now." But she shook her head. "It ain't over," she whispered, eyes wide with fear and awe. "They'll come back." Cole looked out toward the hills, lightning cutting the sky behind him. "Then I'll be here when they do." That night, as the fire crackled low, Evelyn sat across from him, her children asleep in the next room. "Why do you care so much, Mr. Danner?" she asked softly. "You don't even know us." He stared into the flames, his voice low. "Maybe I'm tired of riding past people who need help. Maybe I'm trying to do one thing right before I move on." Her eyes softened. "Maybe you don't have to move on this time." Cole looked up, the faintest flicker of hope in his eyes. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside that small house on the frontier, 2 lonely souls found a fragile kind of peace. And though neither spoke it aloud, they both knew the fight wasn't over yet. Morning broke gray and heavy over the Hart Ranch. The storm had rolled east, but its scars remained, broken fences, trampled mud, and the memory of gunfire echoing in Evelyn's mind. Cole Danner was already up before dawn, shirt sleeves rolled, fixing the corral like nothing had happened. The widow stood at the window, her hands trembling around a coffee cup, watching the man who'd stood between her family and ruin. There was something about him, something steadfast, almost sacred in its silence. When she stepped outside, the cold morning air bit her cheeks. "You don't have to stay, Mr. Danner," she said softly. "You did more than enough last night." Cole didn't look up from his work. "If I leave now, they'll be back before the week's end. Men like Barlow don't forget being shown up by a drifter." She hesitated, then nodded. "Then stay. I'll feed you, though I still owe you more than I can pay." He smiled faintly. "I told you, ma'am, some things ain't meant to be paid for." The next few days settled into a tense rhythm. Cole helped mend the damage while keeping a watchful eye on the hills. Evelyn went about her chores, though her mind often drifted toward him. He had the manner of a man who'd known loss but refused to let it consume him. One evening, as the sun melted into the plains, she found him on the porch cleaning his Colt revolver. "Mr. Danner," she said, stepping closer, "you talk like a man who's seen too much of the world." He looked up, eyes glinting in the firelight. "World don't show mercy to those who don't fight for it. I used to think riding away from trouble made me free. Turns out it just made me lonely." Evelyn sat beside him, the wooden boards creaking under their weight. "Maybe freedom's not about riding away," she said quietly. "Maybe it's about finding a place worth staying for." He didn't reply, but something shifted in his gaze, like a man who hadn't realized how tired he was until someone offered him rest. That night, while the children slept, Cole dreamed of his past, the gunfight in Abilene that took his brother's life, the lawmen who chased him after a killing he never meant to commit. He woke before dawn, sweat cold on his skin. The sound of hooves broke the morning stillness. He rose instantly, eyes narrowing toward the horizon. Barlow was back. This time, he brought 5 riders, hard men with shotguns slung low and vengeance in their eyes. Cole saddled up Dusty, his jaw set. Evelyn came rushing out, fear in her voice. "Cole, please, you can't fight them all." He turned, eyes steady. "Ain't about fighting, ma'am. It's about finishing what they started." She grabbed his arm, tears brimming. "You'll die for people you barely know." He looked at her then, really looked, and said softly, "Ain't dying for strangers, ma'am. I'm standing for something that matters again." Before she could answer, he kicked his horse into motion. The thunder of hooves rolled across the plain as Cole met them halfway, revolver drawn, heart steady as stone. The gunfight was quick, brutal, and filled with the dust of justice. Cole moved with precision, the old instincts sharp as ever. 2 men fell before the rest even took aim. Barlow, wounded and snarling, fired a wild shot that grazed Cole's shoulder. Pain flared, but the cowboy didn't stop. He closed the distance, disarmed Barlow, and stood over him with a cold, quiet rage. "You come back here again," Cole said, voice low, "and I'll forget I ever believed in second chances." Barlow, bleeding and beaten, spat into the dirt. "You'll regret this, Danner." Cole holstered his gun. Maybe, but not today. He watched them retreat toward the hills until the last rider vanished into the horizon. Then his strength gave out. He slumped in the saddle, blood soaking his sleeve. Evelyn came running, crying out his name, her skirts catching on the brush as she reached him. "Cole," she gasped, helping him down. "You're hurt." He winced, but managed a faint smile. "Nothing I can't handle, just a scratch." But when she saw the blood, her heart twisted. She tore her apron and bound his wound, her hands trembling. "You saved my family," she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. "Why would you risk your life for us?" He looked up at her, voice barely above a whisper. "Because you reminded me what decent folks look like. Been a long time since I saw that." She bit her lip, emotions warring between gratitude and something deeper. "You could stay, Cole. This land, this family. We could use someone like you." He stared at her, silence stretching long and full. The thought tempted him, the laughter of children, the peace of an honest day's work, a woman's warmth beside the fire. But he knew the world he came from didn't forgive easily. "If I stay, trouble'll find me again. It always does." "Then let it," she said fiercely. "We'll face it together." He looked at her then, not as a drifter, not as a stranger, but as a man seeing home for the first time. The wind stirred the fields, carrying with it the scent of rain and promise. Weeks passed. Cole healed slowly, though the scar on his shoulder stayed as a reminder of what he'd fought for. The ranch began to breathe again, new fences, healthy cattle, laughter echoing from the porch. The townsfolk whispered about the widow Hart and her cowboy, how he'd faced down Barlow's gang and stayed on to rebuild what life had stolen. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned crimson, Evelyn found him standing at the corral, staring west. "You still think about leaving?" she asked gently. He smiled faintly. "Every cowboy thinks about the road, ma'am, but some roads ain't worth taking once you've found where you belong." She stepped closer, her voice soft. "And have you found it?" He looked into her eyes, that quiet strength she carried even through sorrow. "Yeah," he said at last. "I reckon I have." The wind rustled the tall grass, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried, a sound both lonely and free. But for the first time in years, Cole Danner didn't feel like a man running from his past. He felt like a man who'd finally come home. As twilight deepened, he tipped his hat and smiled. "You know, ma'am," he said, his voice warm with that familiar drawl, "I told you once I don't pay for kindness, but if I ever could, I'd spend the rest of my days trying to repay yours." Evelyn smiled through her tears. "Then stay. That's all the payment I'll ever ask." And as the stars rose over the endless prairie, the drifter and the widow stood side by side, the weight of the world lifting just enough for hope to take its place. So remember, folks, out here on the old frontier, kindness was the rarest gold, and sometimes the bravest thing a cowboy could do wasn't to draw his gun, but to lay down his past and stay. Subscribe for more stories of courage, love, and redemption from the untamed American frontier, where every heart carries a legend.